honorable ministers and distinguished participants. This is my great pleasure to announce the opening of this side event titled Circular Economy and Carbon Neutrality. My name is Alaska at the Ministry of the Environment, and I'll be your master of ceremonies for this event. First, I would like to invite His Excellency Dr. Tsuyoshi Yamaguchi, Minister of the Environment of Japan, for making opening remarks. Minister Yamaguchi, please.
Hello, distinguished participants. I am Dr. Yamaguchi, the Environment Minister of Japan. It is my great honor to welcome you all to the Circular Economy and Carbon Neutrality side event at the Japan Pavilion today. And let me express my deepest gratitude to our co-hosts, the Netherlands, EU, UNEP, UNIDO, and World Economic Forum for jointly organizing this event. We are now facing three global crises: climate change, nature loss, and environmental pollution. In order to address these vital issues, we must transform our socio-economic systems into more sustainable and resilient ones. With this in mind, Japan is now accelerating the transition process to a decarbonized society and circular economy. We all know now that resource extraction and processing account for about half of greenhouse gas emissions. In this context, transition to a circular economy is a must for us to realize decarbonization by 2050. Today, I would like to share with you domestic and international initiatives that Japan is promoting toward the circular economy. Regarding domestic activities, this past June, Japan promulgated the Plastic Resource Circulation Act to facilitate the circulation of plastics across the entire life cycle of plastic products, from product design to waste disposal. The law will go into effect next year. We are now preparing for it. Also, the government of Japan has been promoting public-private cooperation towards circular economy by establishing the Japan Circular Economy Partnership, or what we call J-Force, in March, with Keidanren, the Japan Federation of Economic Organizations, which is Japan's biggest economic federation. In September, J-Force published 131 cases of advanced circular economy initiatives by Japanese companies. A booklet has been published to highlight them. You might take a look at it. On the international side, at the G7 Climate and Environment Ministers meeting in May, Japan proposed the circular economy and resource efficiency principles, and it was agreed to develop it. Japan will actively encourage voluntary actions on circular economy by global companies and investors through the development of the principles. The G20 environment ministers agreed at their meeting in July to establish a portal site on good practices and indicators of circular economy initiatives. Japan will energetically disseminate good practices on circular economy through the portal. In the Asia-Pacific region, Japan has been organizing the Asia-Pacific 3R and Circular Economy Forum as a platform for cooperation among central and local governments, the private sectors, research institutes, NGOs, and international organizations in this region. Japan is committed to further collaborate with everybody toward the global transition to circular economy through these initiatives. I hope today's event will stimulate momentum among us to realize decarbonization through a circular economy. Let us work together to energize this process. Together, we can make a difference, and I'm sure we can create a carbon neutral circular economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite His Excellency, Mr. Stephen van Wimborg, Minister for the Environment of the Netherlands for making opening remarks. Mr. Weinberg, please.
Yes, thank you very much all for the opportunity to speak to you today. First of all, Minister Yamaguchi, for your inspiring words. And also let me use this opportunity and take the liberty to congratulate you on your recent appointment. And we look forward to the continued collaboration with Japan on this important issue of the circular economy. And I would also like to thank all your colleagues who organized today's event, and we are very proud to be a part of this. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the minister said it rightly. The circular economy, it's not a question of whether we want it, it's absolutely necessary. We need systemic change across all sectors, but especially hard to abate sectors. Cement, steel, aluminium, chemicals. We have to move from a linear system to a circular system. And it's for this reason we are very proud to collaborate also with the World Economic Forum, Japan and many others on pushing this agenda, which I think is an integral part, as Minister Yamaguchi said, not only of solving the climate crisis, but also the biodiversity crisis, and make sure that we can live on this planet for many times to come in a healthy, sound fashion. Often we talk about systemic change and the role of governments, ministers in changing laws, making sure that there's carbon pricing, that there's also pricing for the scarcity of resources to in that way foster circular economy. But I think it's also important if we look at the public sector and governments with public procurement in mind. If I can give an example, European governments alone spend 1.8 trillion euros each year, which represents around 40% of EU's gross domestic product. We are therefore also able to change the way we spend that money and make sure that the people and companies who do the work for us as consumers, as governments are, that it is circular. That's why green public procurement policies is the issue I would like to talk with you about today. We have to stimulate investment and innovation for climate neutral solutions when we spend our government euros, yens, or dollars. And one instrument that we've used in the Netherlands is the CO2 performance ladder. The ladder helps organizations reduce their carbon emissions through ensuring that the company's rating on this public procurement ladder is an integral part of the public procurement process. You can obtain a certificate as a company when you can show that you are reducing energy, when you are saving on materials, and if you stimulate innovation. And that way you can get a better chance of getting a public procurement and winning a process and getting can, for example, build a bridge in the Netherlands or maybe build a dike, which, you know, in the Netherlands we are highly dependent on. Over 1,000 businesses in the Netherlands have already been awarded such a certificate. And circular economy and circular way of production is an integral part of this system. And that way we can ensure that in a company there's a real incentive to become more circular. We had a long trial process and we find out that we can actually make this happen. And I would like to share this idea with you today, not because it's the golden bullet. It's one thing that we would like to share with you, and we look very much forward to working with you, also to learn your examples, because no one of us has solved it already. We have a long way to go. But I think if we do this, if we learn from each other's good examples, but also be very open about the things that maybe did not work the way we intended, we can all work together, not only as lawmakers, but especially when we are governments, also in the public procurement area. That way we can scale it, and we look forward also with all the partners in this circular economy for net zero industry transition initiative to learn from each other, to work with each other, and make sure that the circular economy, the systemic change and the role of governments is high on the agenda. So I'm very happy that I could talk with you about this important issue today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, taking this valuable opportunity, I would propose to take a group photo. So for those in person, could you please stand up? And for those connecting online, please stand in front of your web camera for taking the group photo. Thank you for your cooperation. Now we are taking photos, so please smile. We are taking a few more photos, so could you please keep smiling? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Now we'll move into the panel discussion session. I would like to introduce our moderator, Ms. Faustine de la Salle, Co-Executive Director of Mission Possible Partnership. There are many representatives around the world as panelists. Dr. Florica Pink-Hoyer, Director General for Environment in European Commission, participating remotely. Thank you very much. Also, Mr. Alex Sayer, Director of Climate Change and Risk Management, Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Colombia. Thank you so much. Also, Mr. Alejandro Duduma, Acting Director for Climate Change and Green Growth in African Development Bank. Thank you so much. And also, Mr. Cedric Dumeus, Vice President of Public Affairs and Government Relations in Housing. Thank you. And also Dr. Bob Morgan, Executive Vice President in SABIC, participating remotely. Thank you very much for your participation. And last but not least, Mr. Josh Brerio, Executive Lead in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Thank you so much. With that, I'll hand over to Faustine to start the panel discussion.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and thank you very much to the Japanese government and Japanese minister for welcoming us in the Japanese pavilion today. I'm really delighted to have such a diverse and expert group of speakers on the panel today to explore this theme of circular economy and the link with nature in particular. As we've heard from the two ministers a moment ago, resource extraction and or transformation is really a major weight on the climate at this point in time. It can represent up to half of global CO2 emissions when we think about just the extraction and processing of it. A lot of that is fossil fuels that then get burned and add another layer to our CO2 emissions. Heavy industry processes alone, 4 major sectors, steel, aluminium, cement, and chemicals, represent 20% of CO2 emissions today. And some analysis, including those of the Energy Transitions Commission that I have the pleasure to direct, have shown that those CO2 emissions could be brought down by 40% globally by 2050, just thanks to the circular economy. So the potential impact on the climate of really taking circular economy seriously can be massive. And that's really what we're all after here by developing those new business models. It also can have a tremendous impact on the cost of that transition. The lower our energy demands, the lower the level of investment required in the renewable power system that we will need to underpin the energy transition. So it's a good rationale to go after those opportunities, obviously from a resource efficiency point of view, also from a climate point of view, but as well from a financial point of view. So I would like to start discussing this topic with a question to Florica Hoyer at the European Commission. The European Commission has been an active party of GACERE, the Global Alliance for Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency. And I'd love to know from you, what is the type of climate impact that you're expecting in Europe and outside of Europe from circular economy? What is driving you to take such an active role in that alliance?
Thank you very much. And first of all, also to the Japanese government to bring really circular economy to COP26. I regret not being with you in person. I was there last week when we had the nature segment. And I think now it's very good to speak about circularity, because as it was already said by all the speakers before me, what impact it could bring to reduce emissions. And so it's very important to make that known. And perhaps I should start by why have we engaged in GACERE? Because this is this global alliance. I have to perhaps explain that. It's a global alliance on circular economy and resource efficiency. And basically, it intends also to fill this knowledge gap, because it is not enough known. Even the EPCCR report is not really taking into account circularity, although this could really reduce and bring us closer to 1.5, which is all about what you are now in Glasgow are trying to achieve. So I think it's important to fill this knowledge gap and to explain that if you go circular, you have, as it was already said, a lot of benefits, certainly for the climate, but also for biodiversity loss, and the pressure on resource destruction and the pressure on nature is limited, but also on human health, because it is also avoiding pollution, because you go to a regenerative economy, you're not polluting more. When you think about waste and think about landfills or incineration, certainly you can, by going circular, avoid all of this. But I think equally important is that going circular can really create jobs, sustainable jobs, and also is a key element, especially for the EU now in its green transition. So when you see our Green Deal is very much a big part of it is going into circularity in the production processes, really to change the way we produce, but also the change we consume. And we will produce a lot of legislation into that extent. We started with batteries. We will go into exactly these sectors, these hard abate sectors that you mentioned, textile, but also ICTs, but also a lot of steel, aluminium, and so forth. But if you allow, I would like to come back a bit to Glasgow, because I would like to make also a little bit of publicity around it, because we launched it this year together with UNEP and UNIDO, who are with us in the panel. And we have already 15 members and 2 active observers. And of course, also 3 strategic partners, again, present with us in the panel here, the World Economic Circular Economy Forum and the MacArthur Foundation. And then there's also the platform for accelerating the circular economy. And obviously, Japan has been there from the start, and we are very grateful for that. Now, you would have to say, what does it make a difference? Yes, it has made a difference. And I think the minister already touched upon it, but I would like to go further, because when we had the environment ministers meeting in Naples in July this year, we saw what we would call a little bit this Glasgow spirit, because we have now very ambitious and forward-looking language on circular economy included in the environmental communique, and that's the first, and that's extremely important to set the tone. And I think Glasgow, and also by our legislation as EU, we are driving forward this process, try to demonstrate that it is feasible by also creating working papers on circular economy, how it can deliver on biodiversity, on green recovery, on climate change. And these papers, of course, spread the message, hopefully today here at COP26, but also elsewhere, because what we try to say is it makes so much sense from all points of views, reducing emissions, halting biodiversity loss, curbing pollution, but it's also a very cost-efficient way of achieving really all these deep cuts in all 3 triple crisis areas. I just want to say, I think many will say it after me, and some have said it before. If we move, especially we move now to renewable energy, we move to energy efficiency, but all this can only address sort of half of the cut in greenhouse gas emissions. We still have a large 45%, perhaps even less or more, but around that ball figure, 45% we have not reached just by industrial emission cuts. And that is, as it was said, it comes from cars, from textiles, from clothes in particular, from waste, from food, and all the products we use every day. So when we were to go circular in a regenerative, different way of producing, we can certainly reduce enormously our emissions. And this cannot be overlooked when we just really try so hard to go to 1.5%. And it really makes a difference. And last word to say, we have a global alliance. We have our own, we had, for instance, Circular Economy Action Plan. And as I said, we roll out a whole series of legislation addressing different sectors which are having this high potential of circularity, but also are very energy intense. So we can look at two things at the same time. But there are also regional platforms, and we are very proud to be partnering with that. There's the African Circular Economy Alliance, and there's the Latin American and the Caribbean Regional Coalition on Circular Economy. So it is growing, it's spreading, and I'm very grateful for this event because I think it will spread the talk further. And I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's a perfect transition to talk about the Latin American and Caribbean Circular Economy Coalition. Alex, we've just heard about the multiple benefits of the circular economy. What are the specificities in a region like Latin America, in a country like Colombia? What are the opportunities that you share that Florica just mentioned? And what are maybe the specificities that you see?
Okay, yeah, sorry. First, thank you very much, Minister Yamaguchi and the co-host for inviting me to this presentation. So Latin America has a very specific context. In fact, Latin America is one of the most diverse regions in the world. We have many kind of ecosystems, from the tropical forest to the whole ocean and coastal ecosystems, and that make us unique. But at the same time, we have been highly dependent on the extraction and export of natural resources, basically from the mining sector and also from the agricultural sector, and this has put us in a really difficult situation for us in terms of how we are, deeply depending on these natural resources and the impact that we have been putting these natural resources. But then there are other issues in Latin America that, for example, municipal waste will increase by 25% in 2050. 90% of the waste is not utilized in Latin America. So there is an enormous opportunity there. And almost 34% of the food that is produced in Latin America is wasted, is not utilized. So it's lost throughout the whole supply chains. But in fact, there are really nice, even though that situation, there are really nice opportunities and like pockets of fantastic, innovative, regenerative activity in Latin America. So as you, Faustine, said, there is a direct link between the circular economy, or in fact, the linear economy, and GHG emissions. You already said that 40% of global emissions comes from the way we are making and using our products, and that inefficient use of the resources puts a toll on climate change already. And being Latin America, a region where 95% of the companies are small and medium enterprises, where the processes are not high-end processes, there are many inefficiencies through all the value chain. So there are many opportunities to gain efficiencies, to reintroduce resources into our supply chains, and to implement circular economy in our economy as a new development model. So that's why this coalition was born, because we have a lot of things to understand, to take in the same place, and to work together to develop a new economic model. So we want to consolidate with this coalition the circular economy in our region. We have worked with Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, and Peru. These are the first countries that are working in this circular economy. And we have 8 partners that are helping us to reach the goals that we wanted in our coalition. The first one is CTCN, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, PACE, UNIDO, WEF, and UNEP. So this has been a really nice partnership, and in fact, we are really close to announce our regional vision on circular economy. But I can give you some examples of what, or some, some capsules of what is our vision. First, we have 6 lines of work, like priorities. The first one is food and agriculture, because there are many residues that are being produced in the agricultural sector, and we are not integrating that residues into the soil again. So there are a really high opportunity to decrease our, for example, fertilizer use by taking advantage of these residues as a biogas or as a soil amendment in our agricultural sector. And as we saw, we have a 34% of food loss. So we have to work on that also to increase our productivity, but at the same time restore our ecosystem and do agriculture in our ecosystem. The second one is cities and construction. Cities like Latin America, you see it's a rural area, but in fact, most of the countries on Latin America are urban countries. Like between 70 to 80% of the population lives in cities. So, and cities are the places where most energy and resources are consumed. And we are not taking advantage of all that flows of energies, water, and residues that are coming from the cities. So that's why we are focusing on those ones. The third one is electronics. We are importers of electronics. We don't have an electronic industry. So we have to know how to make up with all the residues that, electronic residues that we are producing right now. We have to work collaboratively with other economies in sense of how to take advantage of all these precious materials and minerals that are in the electronics. But then there are 2 other ones that I really like. Tourism. Most of our economy or Latin American economies depend on tourism, but tourism is also a high intensity resource use activity, and we want tourism to be sustainable, not only to visit like the old ecosystem that we have, but to reduce the footprint of tourism. And that's why we are working on that one. And the third one that I really like, and we have been developing a lot of work in Colombia, as well as industrial symbiosis. So with industrial symbiosis, we can take advantage of the material, energy, and water flows, and more our industry more competitive. Because we think that circular economy is a competitive strategy. It's not only an environmental strategy. We see it as a competitive strategy, and we can make our economy more competitive if we work on the circular economy. And industrial symbiosis can help a lot to share resources, to share infrastructure, and to help us reach circular economy goals.
Thank you very much. I quite like the fact that you've forced us to go a step down into specific subsystems that could benefit from the circular economy. And I can imagine, Mr. Dorsuma, that some of those themes resonate. Circular economy in cities, circular economy in the food industry, that problematic also of having to deal with incumbent extraction industries. Again, the African continent is as diverse probably as the Latin American continent. How are you approaching those questions within the African Development Bank? And what do you see as the major areas of opportunities for the continent in the circular economy space?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank the government of Japan for associating us. Is it working? Okay. Let me first thank the government of Japan for associating us to this very important discussion. For us as the African Development Bank, this discussion is very critical because circularity is something that is on top of our development agenda. There are two ways we see that agenda. First is at policy level, and the second one is at financial level. First, at the policy side, as you know, most policies in Africa which are aligned with circularity are focused on waste management only. But we know that circular economy is not just about waste management. It's a complete overhaul of our economic systems, from the way we design goods and services on up to the way we produce them and we distribute them and consume them. So our continent. At the industry level, we also observe that there are some policy gaps on the regulation of consumable goods and the standardization of activities that can enable greater circularity. For example, plastic consumption is causing a major environmental issue in Africa with the accumulation of waste in African cities and also in the rural areas. But there are only a handful of African countries that have implemented quality standard for food grade recycled PET, for instance. These calls for innovation and in order to ensure uptake of circular economy in the continent. We need therefore some greater political momentum and also awareness in order to enhance the level of understanding and mainstreaming of circularity into development strategies in Africa. We also need increased access to data because data is critical, as well as new taxonomies across the continent on what is considered as circularity. I'm also pleased to say that we are hosting the African Circular Economy Alliance, which is an alliance created by African governments to help them mainstream circularity in their development agenda. With that alliance, we have recently identified key sectors that are critical for circularity. These are 5 sectors. We call them 5 big bets for circularity in Africa. These are fashion and textile, packaging, built environment, electronics, and food systems. And we are also currently exploring ways to promote greater uniformization at the industry level in Africa. This is why we are collaborating with an African institution called Organization for Standardization, ASO, in order to develop a continental standard for PET recycling. This will support the creation of regional value chains for recycling and also remanufacturing of secondary materials in order to help smaller countries with insufficient feedstock to reach scale. We will also be supporting the development of national circular economy roadmaps in our member countries with the aim to strengthen circularity in the development strategies. And this is a work that we are doing together with CITRA, the Finnish Innovation Fund. And we hope that these roadmaps can be used as strategic tools that can help countries embed circularity within their NDCs and also their long-term strategies. Secondly, and this is the last point I want to mention, is the issue of finance. Access to finance is very critical to achieve circularity because despite all the policies you have in place to create the conducive environment, you still need access to finance. And since we are at COP26, what we observe is that Africa has only attracted recently 3% of global climate finance, which is largely insufficient to address climate change issues across the continent, including circular economy. Yet we know that recently here at Glasgow, there were some signatories of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And we saw that this alliance is an alliance of institutions that have over 100 trillion of assets under management. So I believe this is an opportunity and a pool of liquidity that needs to be tapped into in order to create opportunities, revenue opportunities for circular economy. Our goal in Africa is to really transform the continent into the next emerging market for green investment and circular economy. And the reality is that the implementation of the NDCs that African countries have put forward recently has demonstrated that these NDCs represent an investment opportunity of about 3 trillion by 2030. In that context, the African Development Bank is working with our member countries to deploy a suite of financing solutions that will help de-risk investment and in order to attract more green finance at scale. We believe that our circular economy facility that we are establishing with some partners, including Finland and the Nordic Development Fund, will provide grant financing to innovative small, medium-sized enterprises to build the case for circular economy as a business model in order to help governments achieve this agenda. We have recently heard some positive outcomes actually during the COP here that can further support the circular economy agenda in Africa, especially in regard to the 5 big bets that I have already mentioned. The new UN Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action, which we see as an important pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the textile and the garment value chains by 2030. In addition, we believe that given the importance of the garment industry in our region, Africa, the bank is promoting greater sustainability. We have what we call the Fashionomics Africa Initiative, which is going to also partner with that new UN initiative here at COP26. As part of the MDB, the Multilateral Development Bank Group, we have signed here at COP a joint statement on nature in order to help us further mainstream nature into our policies, analysis, assessment, advice, investment, and operations. Because for us, nature has always been central to African culture. But because of rapid urbanization, population growth, etc., nature is being completely depleted. And we believe that we need to bring back nature in our development strategies. So through the African Circular Economy Alliance that we are hosting, we are exploring opportunities to embed greater sustainability in various sectors, including built environment. Let me emphasize also the importance of partnership, because for us, this alliance that I mentioned is an African-led alliance, but we still need partnership with other regions like Latin America, Asia, Europe, etc., in order to advance the circular economy agenda on our continent. We strongly believe that it is through collaboration and peer-to-peer exchange that we can successfully scale up circularity across the region. Let me finish by indicating that the African Development Bank has just approved its new climate change and green growth strategic framework for the next 10 years. We just approved it a few days before coming to COP, and we name it Projecting Africa's Voice. So we want to really ground our intervention into Africa's realities regarding circularity and climate action. And we are committing to mobilize greater volumes of multilateral and bilateral funds to incentivize private sector participation and investment in circular economy activities, because circular economy is identified as one of our flagship climate initiatives at the African Development Bank, and it will be very much at the heart of our climate action moving forward. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I think it's very encouraging to hear from different governments around the world or different governmental institutions how much progress is being made in really embedding circular economy in climate policy and investing massively in making it happen. I'm now going to turn to the representatives of the private sector on this panel to get a sense of how do we do this in practice and what's working already and what might require some new forms of value chain collaboration or policy interventions to work. Starting with you, Cedric, Holcim is a major cement manufacturer operating globally. We've heard from both our African and Colombian colleagues that built environment is at the core of circular economy strategies around the world. Where do you see the opportunities in the built environment, both in terms of recycling, but beyond recycling in terms of new forms of business models in the sector? What are you able to do by yourself, and what are you blocked doing at this point in time, and what could unlock that?
Thank you, Faustine, and I wish we had 3.5 hours more on the panel to really go deep into it, but I'll try to be brief. First of all, thank you, Minister, and Japan for the invitation and the organization of this discussion. The way we've approached circular economy is first starting asking ourselves, how are we going to do it? By concluding we're going to do it everywhere, horizontally, across everything that we do. And that means across our manufacturing activities. You were mentioning municipal waste. Across many countries of the world, we reuse the non-recyclable part, the residual part of municipal waste in our process. That's just an example. In the products that we develop and in the way we collaborate with our value chain. So in effect, referring to something that's already been said, we use circular economy as a competitiveness lever and as a CO2, as a climate change lever. And rather than telling you how good we're at it, I'm going to give you two very concrete, practical examples of what it actually means on the ground, on a construction site. So the first one is a product that we've developed in Switzerland. We've given it a fancy name. It's called Sustaino. It's a cement that contains 20% recycled materials in the forms of construction and demolition waste. That means 20% less primary resources, and that means 38% less CO2 footprint. So those who are not in the sector and not familiar with it, like 20%, that's not a lot, that's not very exciting. Actually, it's super exciting. Imagine if all the cement in the world had 20% recycled material, what that would mean in billions of tons of primary resources that would stay in the ground. It's huge. It's huge, and we managed to do it because of technologies, of course, but also because of the collaboration with the government. Because without having a standard that allows us to put it on the market, that gives confidence to the value chain that the cement will have the technical performance required for the high rise or the bridge or whatever you use it for, we wouldn't be able to put it on the market, and we wouldn't be able to sell it. So that's super important. We want to bring in, I'm looking at Florica, we want to bring it to Europe, in every European countries. And there again, we're collaborating with your colleagues to make sure that the standards across Europe allow us to do that. The second example, and actually I'm switching my examples. I was going to use a European example, but hearing you, I'm going to use an African example because we are deploying circular economy at scale in Africa too. And there, it's much bigger than what we do as a material provider. It's how we've collaborated with a value chain partner to develop a network of schools in Malawi that were 3D printed. What's the relation with circular economy? Basically, if you develop 3D printed projects, schools in Malawi, for instance, you need computational design. So architects that are qualified to do digital architecture. You need robotics and the 3D printing technology. You need the materials, so the ink, which is a form of advanced concrete. And you need the labor forces on the ground. You need the capacity, the training, the skills to operate this machine. That means that a full-size, full-blown school was printed with the students in within a week. But what it also means, and there's a very big social impact, by the way, a very big positive impact. But what it means in terms of circular economy is that through computational design, we only use the material where it is needed. So in that instance, it's what we call hollow printing. So the walls are empty. They're not full of materials. We don't need the materials in there. And you don't need the thermal efficiency, for instance, there. And so you only use concrete, for instance, where you need it for the resistance of what you're building. And that means 50% reduction in resource intensity of the infrastructure that you build. Again, this is one project with 10 schools. Imagine if we do that at scale, what we can achieve. And that's the point I would like to land on, and it's the same than gentleman here just said before. It's all about collaboration. It's all about looking beyond our own scope, or just our own material, and it's expanding the way we collaborate across the value chain to be faster, better, and bring circular economy at an industrial scale, and it's possible.
Let me ask you a follow-up question before I turn to the next speaker. Saying that you're way more material efficient through 3D printing is tremendous for the world. One might wonder why a cement manufacturer would want construction to use less cement. So how did that mindset shift happen within the company to embrace material efficiency, even if it can, on paper at least, reduce demand in the sector?
Well, industrial models were traditionally built on volume, but that was 100 years ago. We've evolved, and today, if we're not prepared to change our business model to embrace CO2 efficiency, to embrace circular economy, there is no future. And I referred to the ink, for example, on this 3D printing. The ink is not your standard cement that you go and buy in your DIY. It's ultra high performance product. And that's where the future of construction goes. It's not construction. The world is going to build. We all know that we're going to have 2.5 billion people to cities. 60% of the infrastructure needs to be. The world is going to build. We need the infrastructure around us. But it's about building better with better material and adapting our industrial models to that.
Thank you. Let me turn to Bob Morgan at SABIC, major chemicals company, but also involved in other sectors like metals. Bob, can you give us other examples of how you're progressing the circular economy, both from a recycling perspective, but also from those new business models perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like Minnie said, I thank the Japanese government and the minister for the opportunity to speak here, and just really inspired by the comments from the other panelists so far. And I just want to, kind of build off Cedric's last comments. I mean, I think whether it's the cement sector, steel, chemicals, plastics, or other, it's a necessity for us to think differently about our business models, right? It's a competitive necessity to thrive through this transition by welcoming the change that's coming. And I think he summarized it really well for the cement and construction sector. And for us, it's the same issue, right? It's recognizing that our customers, our value chain, are going to demand more efficient materials, lower use of materials, designed for recyclability, inherently also probably resulting in lower virgin material production, but that's okay. The reality is that we need to drive through this transition with the most efficient solutions possible. So from a SABIC perspective, I can maybe give a perspective. I mean, I think we view the carbon neutrality topic and circularity, is a very interconnected set of issues and opportunities for us. We have been very focused since our announcement of our True Circle platform in 2019 around delivering a holistic set of solutions for plastic circularity. So that includes looking at certified renewable feedstocks and renewable-based products to lower carbon emissions, whether that's certified circular products, which are based on advanced recycling technologies for plastics, whether it's mechanical recycled solutions, or specific services that we provide around design for recyclability or closed loop solutions. We have to not only provide new technologies that can enable a lower footprint for our products, the ability to recycle them, but we also have to have new business models for doing it. And I'll take an example of design for recyclability. I mean, if at the end of the day, we take very complex structures that have been developed over the last 50 years and don't change our thought process on what packaging should be for the future, and try to replicate those very complex structures with new processes, I think we failed in the process. Designing for recyclability at the beginning, working within the value chain to figure out what the real needs for the product format are, how can you design in recyclability into that product at the beginning, is an essential new way of thinking that requires a very cross value chain engagement to make that happen. It's not going to come because a material producer or a converter or a brand owner independently wants to do it. It requires all of us to work together. And I'll use the other example of the closed loop solutions. One of the ways that we're finding is very effective to driving access to plastic waste and affordable recycling solutions are developing closed loop solutions where we engage from the retailer all the way through the value chain to make sure that we can collect waste that's in a high purity form, that we can convert it and reuse it to make virgin materials again. So, I think you have to think differently about the business models, about the way that you collaborate, and you've got to take some risk in this process. One of the things that I certainly was proud of in SABIC is that in 2019, we made the commitment to commercialize advanced recycling or chemical recycling technologies ahead of others in our peer group. And it took risk putting a new feedstock into our crackers and managing that. But it also allowed us an immense opportunity to discuss with the value chain the potential opportunities, to understand the value, understand the hurdles required in making these transitions happen, and developing new products with our customers in that process. So I think, not engaging in this transition, going back to the previous speaker's comments, I think is a risk for sure. We'd rather lead by engaging, by taking risks, by piloting new technologies and approaches, and by partnering very differently than we have in the past. And I think as we go through the rest of the session, you'll hear more examples. But I'm very proud of what we've done in the plastic circularity space, and as well the investments that we're making beyond that to make sure our operations have a low carbon footprint as well.
Thank you very much, Bob. Let me turn to Joss from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. You've been working on circular economy for ages, way before it was trendy, I think it's fair to say. What are you seeing now as really getting momentum and progress? And maybe what are the areas of the circular economy that you think are still under-leveraged by policymakers and corporates?
Thank you, Faustine, and thank you, Minister Yamaguchi, for the opportunity to be here. It's a great pleasure to take part. Indeed, we've been doing it for a while. We celebrated 11 years of the foundation recently, and the idea for us really is to look at the economic opportunities and where the leverage points are. Now, to answer your question precisely, what we've seen through the engagement, notably with the European Commission in a run-up to the circular economy action plans, is a greater focus on upstream. And we're seeing that, and I've just heard it from Cédric and from Rob, from the private sector perspective, it is about getting the right design in the first place. And this is super important. For a long time, circular economy has been limited to a waste management strategy or a materials management strategy, which is absolutely crucial. But that's the downstream part of the equation. How to leverage the upstream part of the equation, that's where the innovation happens. Because at the end of the day, it is about what we put on the market, both in terms of nature of feedstock, but also the volumes of feedstocks. And jumping on your example about 3D printing, which is also called additive manufacturing, you understand very well that when you add, instead of taking a block of stuff and taking away the elements you don't need, then adding is only using the materials you have and the materials you require. And of course, what you don't waste, you don't need to replace. Therefore, the extraction impacts are greatly lowered through careful design and planning and using the right processes. Now, what we're seeing is that greater uptake of upstream and the importance through, for instance, the Sustainable Products Initiative that the EU is pushing, the right to repair, the focus on repairability, the focus on really sticking to the second principle of the circular economy, which is about keeping valuable materials and products in loop. It is displacing the need for virgin resources. Now, at political level, this is getting traction. And what we're seeing as well is that the scale of the discussion is globalizing. Circular Economy, Latin American and Caribbean Coalition, the African Circular Economy Alliance, GACERE. You mentioned, Minister, the G7 process with the Resource Efficiency Alliance. We could also quote the resolution that was adopted at UNEP 4 on sustainable consumption and production, citing the critical importance of circular economy models in order to achieve SDG 12. We're seeing the conversation pick up at WTO as well. It's been 3 years only since they introduced the notion of circular economy in trade agreements. It is now in every single discussion, as I'm told by our partners in the WTO. So that pickup is there. What we probably need to do now is also looking at the enabling conditions. At the foundation, we look really at working at the interface between the private and the public sector. We talk about innovation a lot. People talking about innovation a lot as a throwaway comment, but innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum and it has a purpose and it needs to be enabled. If we're going to look at business models that favor those materials to flow and to be kept in circulation as opposed to wasted, they need the right cost and incentive structure. We talk about, products as a service. It's all over the place. It's mentioned, but does it actually exist? What actually favors those models? What puts them on an equal footing with the throughput sales of volume that we've inherited from the industrial revolution? So these questions, I think, remain to be put on the agenda. There is massive pickup. The upstream side of the story is definitely rising to prominence, but we still need to push questions around the fact that the current model is hardwired for and by the linear economy.
Thanks, Ross. Let me directly throw that question in Florica's direction. What type of enabling conditions has the European Commission already put in place? What do you see as the big successes of circular economy policy in Europe to date? And what are the things that you're working on for the next few years to progress on the foundations that you've already established?
Now, enablers is actually, I start by the political enablers and then the financial enablers and then research. And then I will explain a little bit how we do this on a regulatory basis, because that's also an enabler if you want. First of all, I think the fact that we had the Green Deal as a policy strategy, which is quite holistic, helped enormously to refocus. And part of that is indeed to spur then circularity. And then we had the Circular Economic Action Plan, already 2 even, and that was very prominently explained, and all the objectives were highlighted. So that created the mindset, if you want. We also have under the Green Deal, we have also a matching financing framework now. The architecture of our financing spending is also going partly into circular. Now, I have to admit, unfortunately, I think overall in the world, the percentage of circular is, I think, something like 8%, and we are like perhaps by 12% in the European Union, which is not that much. So there's a lot of scope to increase. But what we did is, for instance, we had, you might have heard about it, the resilience recovery funds. We were providing a target for green or climate and green and biodiversity. And of course, therein, member states could opt also for circular solutions. So that helped but it's not enough. And as it was said, we also need to invest, and we do invest in innovation under various funds. So there is, in any case, a financial architecture that can underpin and support member states when they want to go into circular production processes. And I think also private sector is going in to help, and that is exactly the most important one for us, because for industry, it is important to have the investment funding, because there are quite a lot of first investment costs. But then from us, they always ask, give us regulatory certainty and also actually predictability in order to make this investment. And with that, I would come to some of the proposals that we have launched, which will be relevant for circularity, in which we are having in the pipeline. Now, we started clearly with, for instance, with plastics, and also single-use plastics. That was a very popular measure, but not so much popular for industry, but they are adapting. But it is clearly a strong signal of wanting to reduce, partly with single-use plastics, even a ban, but
we'll hope that we'll get back in touch with the European Commission in the next couple of minutes. And while we solve the technical glitch, I'm going to turn to you, Alex, for a similar type of question. Like, what type of very tangible, before we turn back to you, we have Florica back online. Okay.
I will catch up very quickly. I'm sorry, but we had batteries as well, where we now go for certain, targets also on recyclability, but also on the elements of, for instance, hazardous subsidies and so on. We go now, we just will propose very probably next week already, a proposal on shipment of waste. That is also quite important in circularity, because you need to create the internal market for having enough commodities, and waste is a very important commodity, in order to create, the critical mass, in order to then invest into going into what I would call secondary raw materials, but which are high quality raw materials. And for that, you need to keep waste also within Europe in order to use it and scale it up. And that is certainly also true when you talk about shipment which relates to steel and things like that. But can also be textile, everything else. What we will also do is we look at what we call a general product framework, a sustainable initiative on a product framework. And there we will, as a sort of mother of all legislation, create a framework on saying how much and what we want to do on this design process. So from the start of a product design, you should make it upgradable, recyclable, reusable. We have several principles we look at. And then we will roll it out into, as I said in the very beginning, those sectors that have a lot of potential for circularity, but are these hard-to-abate sectors or are using a lot of energy. And that is, of course, steel and construction sector, because there is a lot of potential, as we just heard, cement and steel, aluminium, but also electronics, textile, furniture, and so on and so on. We have looked at 7 sectors. This is not a quick fix. It is taking a lot of time. So from a regulatory point of view, we are starting now to put out the frameworks, and then it is for industry to take it up, and for investors to to finance, and for others also to go into the necessary innovation. What is more important is the pathway, and I like when the colleague from the bank said it's also about a competitive strategy. We certainly believe that by investing in circularity, you create long-term sustainable economy. And actually, I think when you look for a individual industry, it is actually quite interesting, especially now when we see how dependent you are from supply chains. Isn't it then more interested if you reuse what you have, right? You also reduce your environmental footprint, for instance, in water and other materials that you use, and also the carbon footprint. So, but it brings price stability because you're not depending on certain fluctuations. So there are lots of benefits for everybody in. But as I said, we start with a regulatory approach now, but there's a policy approach, regulatory approach. It is taking time, but I think the pathway into that regenerative economy is laid out and will be pursued. I'm sorry that I was long, and I'm sorry for my technical glitch. I'm sorry for that.
No worries. Thank you very much. Fortunately, we have a relatively long panel for a COP panel, so we have the time to deep dive a bit, but I will ask the speakers to be brief in their next answers so that we have the time to go through a next round of interventions. Alex, I saw you listening attentively to what Florica was saying about the type of policies that have been put in place at European level. I'd love to hear from you how much you're learning from intergovernmental exchanges on that front, and what are the things that you're starting to do in Colombia to create those incentives that Joss was talking about, that really create a favorable environment for investment in the circular economy from a corporate point of view?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question, and I'm going to start in the second part of the question. So we always think in circular economy that companies has to be innovative and the supply chain has to be innovative. But I really believe, and we really believe in Colombia, that the policy making should be innovative as well. So Paul, you have to be innovative because policy also have a linear approach. In fact, all these command and control approach, where you set emission standards and you said, you know, that you have to comply with some standards, and then when you produce the waste, you have to send it to a landfill. That kind of policy don't enable the circular economy approach. So in Colombia, we are doing an exercise to rethink the policy and the policy that we have already right now to on how to promote circular economy, in fact. And I will give 2 examples. The first one is dangerous waste. Dangerous waste, or the dangerous waste, doesn't have a classification on subproduct. There is no in Colombia dangerous subproducts. And when you don't have that classification, that means that that kind of waste should be treated, but not you cannot put it again into the cycle. So we are doing efforts on how to change the classification of dangerous waste, and that's one example. The other one has to be with the construction and the demolition waste. In order to take advantage of to recycle the construction and demolition waste, you have to give it up to another company that is a management company. So the construction companies that wants to take advantage of that residues in their own construction have to create another company in order to take advantage or recycle that residues. So we are doing a regulation amendment in order to habilitate these kind of companies in order then to use the waste. So that we think that is the kind of actions we have to do in the government in order to habilitate or enable the conditions for circular economy. And on the other hand, what we are doing in Colombia as well, a part of these ones, we are scaling up like the circular economy to the top of the political agenda. So we don't see this as I mentioned already, an environmental agenda, is a competitiveness agenda. So we are putting to the table the industry and commerce ministry, the agricultural ministry, the energy and mining industry, in order together to formulate circular economy actions in Colombia.
Does that include financial mechanisms as were described by our colleague from the African Development Bank earlier?
Not financial, we haven't worked in financial mechanism, but there is an example. We have been working on a single-use materials tax, no? So we work on that to put it in a tax reform in order to put it like a tax to single-use materials, in order to enhance the use of reusable materials instead of single-use ones.
Mr. Dormusuma, how do you think African states are approaching the question of the circular economy? And we've heard from both the European Commission and the Colombian government that this was a question of industrial competitiveness for their own regions. Do you think that African states really see the circular economy as an industrial strategy? And what are the opportunities in terms of economic development that you can see arising in the region?
Thank you. I hope it works now. Huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think to respond directly to your question, to date, circular economy is not yet an industrial sector in Africa because most of the players in that area are in the informal sector. Let me give you an example. You know that in Africa, most of the waste that is produced ends at landfills. And on those landfills, you have some informal workers there. They collect the waste, and they actually it's a way of creating jobs in the informal sector. But this comes with a lot of environmental and health impact because the way waste is disposed is not sustainable at all. So, but we see that there is a huge opportunity, a huge investment opportunity there. Actually, a recent report that we have done has suggested that we have an opportunity of about $8 billion per year in just that particular sector. The way you structure the informal sector in order to better manage waste that is ending in the landfill. So in our institution, we think of linking the two levels, the upstream and the downstream that my colleague has spoken about. You know, upstream policies are very critical. We know that, as I mentioned earlier. So our objective is that with the creation of, with the support that we are going to provide to countries, to national governments to have their roadmaps for circular economy, they will be able to get the right policies in place. But at the same time, you have to link that to what is going on at upstream level, meaning the investment that we do in order to better structure that sector, to make it a strong business case, because actually it is not the case. We need to create that business case for circularity for those informal workers to maybe transform themselves into private sector players in that area. So far, we don't see it, and at the bank, we are keen to really support the sector in order not to protect the environment, but also to create jobs, but create investment opportunities for those that are working in that sector to generate revenues and help grow the national economies.
Thank you very much. Cedric, what do you need to go faster? Allsim is already investing significantly in this space. We've heard you mention examples of actions in both developed and developing economies. How could you do things even faster? What are you missing for that?
You're not going to hear that often from industry. We need strong regulations. That's what if we are to create the employment through waste recovery and recycling and waste preparation activities. Without having the regulatory framework, we cannot do it for liability reasons, for market credibility reasons, for industrial reasons, because we need to have the emission standards, the recyclability standard. So without the strong regulation, we can't do it. So it's actually what we need is exactly what you're developing and what you were describing in Colombia, and that's universal. The second element is standards. We're innovating in industry, we're innovating fast. I just gave you 2 examples, and there are hundreds of examples, and it's going to go faster. So we need the standardization framework to be as dynamic and being able to catch up with the innovation. Because again, if we don't have the standards, that the example I mentioned with the recycled content in cement, if we don't have the standard, we can't put it on the market. And for instance, we know we can go to 50% recycled construction demolition waste in some cement, but we can't put it on the market. So without the standards, or put it in positive way, with the standards, we'll be able to go faster.
Bob, same question to you. Regulations and standards, do you agree with that? And what else, including outside of the policy space?
Yeah, no, look, I agree very strongly, I think, with all the comments from the group to this point. I mean, if I look at whether it's plastic circularity for our business or low carbon economies and low carbon processes, you know, clarity over the standards and clarity over the regulatory framework is going to be what's key to driving the investment, to giving us the confidence for long-term investment. I mean, I think, you know, what you have to recognize, and I'm sure it's very similar in the cement to steel and other industries, but for us, you know, we build an asset for a lifetime of 30 to 50 years. So we have to make sure that we understand the implications of the changes we're going to make, that if we take technical risk to implement a new technology, we know that we can believe in the regulatory framework being sound for us to implement it in the market and have it be a credible solution, right? So these are critical, and the standards as well are essential. You know, and, you know, beyond these, look, I think we have to be very, if I add another element here, right? I mean, I think we have to be very comfortable collaborating within our industries, with governments, with academic institutions in ways that we're not comfortable, right? And in more open, collaborative ways than we have in the past. I mean, I'm one of the reasons I'm on this panel is representing our efforts with the World Economic Forum. I'm really proud of our low carbon emitting technologies platform, which is working across our industry, in some ways sometimes uncomfortable because of the competitive nature of our products and portfolios, but to develop together technical solutions, but also positions on what the right regulatory frameworks are, what the right standards are, to drive that forward. And I think this is something we have to do. I think going forward, you know, the ability to drive these things independently is very challenging, and I think could likely lead to the wrong kind of competitive solutions being brought forward in the market. And so I'm very pleased with the engagement we have in cases like that. I'll also throw in the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which I think is another great example of a cross-value chain collaboration. Also looking at similar sort of challenges. We have to work together differently, and we have to, in the policy side, yes, we need a strong regulatory framework, but we need one that's science-based and based on credible solutions and credible approaches. A reactive approach towards the regulatory environment without thinking about the all-encompassing set of solutions is a real concern from my side. And I'll just use one example. I mean, it's great to provide a regulatory position around, you know, banning a material or displacing a material, but if that's not looked at in concert with, for example, plastics and carbon, to where you deliver as a result of that framework solutions that create more carbon emissions, I think that's a failure, right? So we have to be engaged in a much more open dialogue between the policymakers and industry to make sure that we give holistic solutions that make sense.
Joss, value chain collaboration is also at the core of what you do. What has changed in that space? Is it easier to do value chain collaboration now than it was 3 years ago? And what makes it work? What's the secret recipe?
It is easier. I'm not saying it's cracked and it's all good and well and everybody collaborates, but I think we've moved on from a question around, is that going to hamper my competitiveness? So it needed to be framed in a pre-competitive space in order to have that collaboration. Now it's pretty clear that once the objective is understood and everybody agrees on the perspective, and the circular economy is the perspective, everybody finds the place where to collaborate. because the definition is clear. And again, going back to the taxonomy and the regulation and all the frameworks and the standards, it's a very important point, because a taxonomy is nothing more than a more detailed and more operational version of a definition. And if we agree on the terms, then we know how to collaborate. And that notion also of understanding that we're talking about value circulation. So creation of value, not through extraction, sales, and disposal, but multiple cycles in which multiple actors derive value at different points in the value chain. And that's wickedly difficult to map. But once everybody finds their place and understands that the solution that they've been looking for is actually within another company in the same industry or another industry, is extremely powerful, because once you get to that stage of collaboration, and sometimes it is as simple as saying, we're two big water brands and we're going to agree on standardizing the shape of the bottle, because that simplifies massively the recycling systems. Therefore, we're going to be able to recuperate more material out of it. So, which was usually seen as a marketing argument and as a differentiating point, so two bottles being very identifiable. When you collaborate and the incentive is to get more of the material back and therefore impact your bottom line positively because you're going to get your hands on more feedstock, then you can do away with that almost instinctive reaction to say, oh, we can't do that, that would be too close and that will hamper competition. So understanding all the mechanics of the value creation is absolutely key. Still a bit of work to be done though.
Maybe a last question, because we're running out of time, to our three institutional government representatives. How are you involving corporates and industry in the design of policymaking in your different regions? Just a few words from each of you, starting with the European Commission.
I mean, there's a clear stakeholder process. We have, for instance, in chemicals, we have a round table, but we also meet, I mean, as we always do with any legislation, we have a very intense consultation process before. We also check with, I mean, we need to have the right data. In circularity, it's very important also to understand what is the time frame and what is feasible, because you might have very high ambitions, but you must know, is it feasible to reach that target, or can you go higher or lower? And then you need to know, it's not just one industry, it must be also, there's often symbiosis. I mean, if you talk about waste, you have to know the other industries cooperating. So it's quite complex, but this is, I think, the normal way of coordinating and consultation, because we have strong impact assessments to undergo anyhow.
Alex?
Two examples that we have. One, the roundtable on sustainable management of plastics. So we set it up with different stakeholders from the industry, the NGOs, the recyclers, in order to launch our plastic pact. So that's one example. And in Colombia, we build, or we structure 22 local roundtables on circular economy. So in each of large and medium cities in Colombia, there are these roundtables when there is the academic sector, the private sector, the public sector, discussing about projects and policies on circular economy that came to the ministry, and we foster the policy development given those inputs.
On our side, is it okay? Okay. On our side, I think there are a lot of activities in terms of consultation, not only between us and the national governments, but also between the national level and the municipal level, especially in big cities where waste is still a big issue. We mentioned regulation, so I think regulatory frameworks are key at national level, but we need to translate them into actions at municipal level. So this is an area we are consulting with some governments, like those that are members of the African Circular Economy Alliance in order to show the way to the other countries. So far, we have a few countries that are committed to that agenda, and we want them to show the example. Countries like Rwanda, South Africa, Nigeria is also really interested, and we are creating an ecosystem of circular economy at institutional level in those countries. Starting with Nigeria, which has established what they call the National Circular Economy Platform to share experiences across the sectors and also influence the design of the nationally determined contribution. Actually, this is one of the good examples of a revised NDC where circular economy is really mainstream into some of the actions to address climate change. Let me also mention one last thing. I think international cooperation is very critical here, especially on a particular issue in Africa, e-waste. In Africa, we are seeing that this is going to be a big issue, and this waste is coming from different regions like Asia, Europe, etc., without any regulation. And I think that there is a room for an institution like the World Trade Organization to come up with some regulations. Actually, otherwise, we are going to face a big issue, and we see that already in Africa. And I'm sure this is an issue that is also being faced in other regions like Asia and Latin America.
Thank you. We're reaching the end of the panel, so I'll ask one final question, the same one to all of you, and I will ask you to answer in a very brief way. And my question is twofold. One, what is the one action that your organization, NGO, corporate, government, is going to take in the next 2 years to progress this agenda? And what is the one dimension of the circular economy debate and agenda that you think we haven't cracked yet? We'll start with you, Joss.
Oh, well, thank you very much. So you're asking us to be extremely brief, but you have 2 questions. That's slightly unfair.
1 sentence per question. This is perfectly feasible.
Yes, absolutely. First one, we're going to carry on making the economic case for the circular economy because that's where it gets traction. And secondly, the thing that we haven't cracked yet enough is the linkage between circular economy and the global challenges that we're trying to solve. Climate change here, biodiversity at CBD. The circular economy is nowhere to be seen yet in that discussion. So joining the dots, linking these problematics with the proper solution space that we're pushing, that's what we need to crack.
Fantastic. Cedric.
On what we will do, we hope, I'm looking at Florica. We hope we'll be rolling out cement with 20% recycled content across all European countries where we operate. Hopefully 2022, if we have the standardization framework. That's a commitment. The nut we haven't cracked yet, I think we should all work on it together, is the business case. It's talk more about how you develop the business case, where it makes sense, where you have all the leverage. I think that's one area which we could explore more.
Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, in terms of the first question, I mean, I think 2 exciting activities for us that will commercialize over or be demonstrated over the next 2 years. One, our first full commercial unit for advanced recycling is coming forward from SABIC in partnership with Plastic Energy, operated in the Netherlands at our site in Helene. I'm very excited to see that operational by the end of next year. And actually, subsequently, in the following year, the first demonstration of electric cracking at scale in a pilot facility with BASF and Linde, which allow us to make that whole process low carbon, which is very exciting. So I think we're taking risks to invest at scales to demonstrate these concepts. But then going back to the last speaker's comments, I think the nut we have to crack is how do we, again, on the business model, not just the demonstration and validating of these, but how do we make them scalable globally to translate these, right? Working on that business model to not only take pilot examples, but to take them and make them, again, globally scalable is, I think, a key still.
Thank you. Alamdou.
Just one word. We need to think about circular economy beyond waste. I think it's the only way we could address the challenge, because if we just limit the discussion or the issue around waste management only, I don't think we'll get out of that. Thank you.
Alex.
I think we should continue working on mainstreaming circular economy in the regional political agenda in Latin America. And also, I think like the things that we should put more effort on is on the legal arrangement that we have to work on to enable circular economy at the local level.
And finally, Florida.
I mean, for us, circular economy probably means really we address the triple crisis. We address climate, biodiversity, pollution, because we take less from nature, we use longer what we take and more efficiently, and we give it back, I mean, because we recycle it. But I would mainly like to end with a message of optimism, because going circular really brings benefits for the economy, but also for the environment, climate and environment, but also for citizens. So it's a positive agenda. Let me stop with that.
Thank you for finishing on this note of optimism. And I think we'll be delighted to continue working with all of you on those topics within the Circular Economy for Net Zero Industry Transition Initiative, which is led by our colleagues at the World Economic Forum, and within the broader Mission Possible partnership, which tackles circular economy among other levers of decarbonization in those heavy industry sectors. It's been a real pleasure to moderate this very good debate. So a big thank you to all speakers, and thank you again to the Japanese Ministry for hosting us and inviting us today.
Thank you very much, Basti, and all the panelists for your active discussions. I strongly agree with Cedric that I should have said 3 more hours. Sorry about that. But nevertheless, your discussion has encouraged and inspired us to rethink about how to move towards transitioning to a circular economy. And I would also like to thank my co-hosts as well as IGES for organizing this event. And I hope we can collaborate further as we move along to strengthen our collaborations. With that, now I would like to announce the closure of this side event. Thank you very much once again for your participation, and wish you have a safe and healthy trip home. Thank you very much.